Back in the meeting controller, it's now time to actually create and send responses. Now, since we're currently not storing any data in the database, for now all I will do is create responses with a message in the link and send back the data or some dummy data, whatever is appropriate, which was sent with the request. Of course, this will change later in this course when the database is introduced to this project and when database operations were explained. So I want to start with the store action here in the meeting controller again. We already fetch all the data in separate variables, and now I want to create a new variable which I will call meeting. This variable will be an associative array, and here of course I will create a kind of meeting object, of course later on when database is available an actual object will be created, but for now this associative array should represent a meeting object. And this is of course important as this later will be transformed or sent back as JSON data through the JSON method. Now this meeting object or array here will receive a title, and of course I will use the title variable as a value here. The same is true for description and time, as well as the user ID. Now, I also want to append something else or want to implement something else in this meeting object or array here. The link. I will give this link a key name of viewMeeting to describe what the link does. And then the link itself should also be an associative array, where the first element is the actual link, API v1 meeting, and then slash and a dummy meeting ID, as we currently don't have any real IDs as nothing is stored in the database. The second element will have the key method and should just describe which method needs to be used to actually access this route successfully. So this is get in this case. So this will be the meeting being sent back, including the link, and with this data I'm able to create a new response, and this should also be a new variable called response. And this response again will be an associative array to easily transform this into a JSON data later. And this array should have the message as a first element, where I will just say meeting created. And of course the second element will be the meeting itself with a key of meeting to identify it. Now with this response variable created, it's now time to use Laravel's response helper method to get a reference to the response object being sent, and use the JSON method to transform this into a JSON response and also to transform the data sent with the response into JSON. So here of course I pass the response variable, and I will also set the status code to 201 to indicate that everything was successful and a new resource was created. Now I will not go through the creation of this response objects and the response for all controller actions, since it really doesn't vary that much. It's always the same, and all I do is exchange the link names, the links, and of course the actual data being sent back as well as the messages, but the overall structure doesn't change. However, I will go through all the important changes or interesting parts so that nothing gets lost. And of course, the whole code is appended to this module. Now with all the other responses created, I want to guide you through some interesting things or things I want to point out. For example, when having a look at the index controller action, note that no longer one single meeting is being passed, but instead an array of meetings. And this of course is the case because the index controller action should actually return a list of all meetings and not just one. Now when having a look at the destroy controller action, which is responsible for deleting a meeting, you will see that no longer is the view meeting link provided, but instead the link leads to the creation of a new meeting. However, the more interesting part is the new key which is introduced in the link array here. This third element, params, lists all the required parameters this route or this controller action needs to work correctly. Now I think this is a good idea since this is a post request route and therefore data is not appended in the URL automatically, but instead has to be provided by the user. In the registration controller, in the store controller action where users are registered for meetings, I not only return the meeting or the user, but I instead return both data fields, since I think it's interesting to know which user signed up for which meeting. The same is of course here true for the destroy method, which is responsible for, well, unregistering a user from a meeting. We don't delete the meeting or the user, simply the registration is deleted or the link between meeting and user. And therefore there is no reason not to return meeting and user or to delete them, this would be very wrong, but instead I will still return the data or the information about which user signed out of which meeting. However, note that only the name of the user is returned and not the complete user data like password or email, because I think this data should be kept private and not responded or sent out to the public. Now in the auth controller I do return the complete user data, but this is only for testing purposes and will change later on. Nothing spectacular besides that in this controller though. Now with all these changes in place, it's finally time to test it, and for this I will of course use Postman again. Now here, in order to send a request, like for example creating a new meeting, the first step is to go to the body tab here and provide the data which should be sent with the request. Also make sure to provide the header X requested with and set it to XML HTTP request for everything to work correctly. Now when creating a new meeting, which data has to be provided? Well, of course the title, description and user ID and the time. Now note that in the data I entered here, the time format I have is a very long string which consists of a 4-digit year, the month, the day, the date time with hours and minutes, and the time zone of this time. Now this is a certain date format I want to enforce throughout this application, and I will come back to this in this module. Now with that data provided, if I click send, you now see the success message, you see the data I sent there get sent back, and you also can see the link or the route which should be used to access the individual meeting. I can also try out another route, like for example creating a new user. And again here I pre-populated the body field and set the header, and of course I'm sending a name, the password and the email, so basically the data our controller action expects to get to function correctly. Now if I click send, you again see that this is successful, that the user was created, and you see the data we sent there. Now of course you may try out all the other routes, and don't forget to set the header as shown before and pass the right data, and you should be able to see the success messages and the data being sent back for all those routes.